who is going, Andrea Babington joined the labor movement when she began working in the hotel sector in downtown Toronto. She became one of the youngest chief stewards in her union's history at the age of 19. As a union organizer for many years, Andrea played a pivotal role in campaigns like Hotel Workers Rising, which raised the living standard for thousands of hospitality workers across North America. Andrea has been part of the Labor Council Executive Board since 2004, serving for 8 years as vice president. From my work, I met Andrea at many strikes, at many picket lines. She always made time when we worked for Justice for Janitors. She always made time for us and came and sang songs and lifted our spirits. And I would like to give Andrea the floor to start us off tonight.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? All right. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I, even though I'm out of town, I really wanted, I'm multitasking with so many things, but I also wanted to be here for a few minutes just to also bring greetings. And I feel like I'm in the right place, and the conversation that intend to happen, you know, sometimes we keep moving on in terms of our own struggles, and we tell ourselves many times that this is the way it's going to be, and not necessarily where we see hope. So for me, joining in this a little bit in this discussion, I think is so important. And I as an immigrant coming into this country, I just want to say, um, I I came in not understanding, as a young person, not understanding the dynamic of you know, where my life was going to take that turn, but knowing that I got on a flight because I was a young person who my father passed away when I was in my teen, and he was the person that looked after myself and my 5 brothers for many years as a single father. And out of that years, I remember looking up to him as almost like a giant, a tall person, not just in size, but his vision and the ambition of making sure not just a dream of his family um, being taken care of and rise to that occasion, but the same hope for the community. And I watched him over those years taking care of the community. And so when I got into Canada, and realized that it's not the same. It's not home. And at 18 years old, I was trying to figure out how to put food on the table, and struggled so much. There was not a lot of family for me to look to, but I also realized as well that I wasn't alone. I was struggling, and there was many coworkers that came from right across around the globe that have their different stories. But I see a level of exploitation, that it wasn't a secret. We, you know, watching my own employer who look at me and let us know that in these struggles, as they cut the cake and they celebrate their wins, you know, let us know that this is an account of us as mostly women of color, immigrant, and they let us know that they, you know, this is how much we gain out of you, you know, climbing on your back. But if you don't like that, it's a revolving door you could just go through. There is many more like you will come. And there was times where I just put myself into a corner and feeling downhearted and just weep, wondering, how do I get out of this? I felt like I was in a prison. I got off of a plane, but the rest of it was just a prison, and wanted to figure out I can't run back. But for me to make changes, it means I need to also willing to lift my coworkers. And it came at a time where many of them speak many different languages. And I had to find ways to make sure that they get to tell their own stories of their own vision. Why are they here, and how do we stand up for our rights? And part of that, if it takes me leading them, I was willing to do that. It came with many threats of, you know, for management saying, mind your own business. And how do I succeed if I'm not able to lead my coworkers? How do I succeed if I'm not able to give voice to some of my coworkers who I learned after that they were strong, they were leaders in their own country, and just wanted us to come together. And as I continue that work, I believe within my own union, seeing myself moving to more than different level, from being a steward to a staff organizer, and moving on to sitting on the seat of the Labor Council, to with my the burning in me to make changes. But it didn't come easy. As I do that work, it didn't come from a handbook. I think that urgency to make the change, that urgency to make sure that others have that right. There was exciting days when even my own union have me as a staff organizer going out, and I felt I was doing the right thing. I was fighting, I was getting work done. But imagine, like, for me, walking back into that place and find that my leader, as a white, I would say, lead, would wait until I leave that room to say to that general manager, don't mind her. She's a cleaner. She's a hotel worker. And see the dynamic of that change the next day, because I was nobody in that within that 24 hours. I was nobody. And how do you keep your head up and continue on that path to take on the fight, the mission that you set out to do, knowing that the the barrier I'm facing is not even from who I'm taking on this fight with. It's my own peer who's worried that I'm moving, I'm excelling, and it wasn't meant for me to do that. It was difficult, and just to keep the dream as I kept going on. But it goes further, and and to where I've been asked, for a Black person, why are you Black people always angry? And not the way around it, asking the question, what is it that's wrong or we're doing wrong? What's causing this? And trying to press through that. So those barrier that's there, and I would go to my bed just quitting my leadership in every form. Just before I climb onto that bed, I quit. And I could take going into a place, and the management just hammer me, and I know what I'm setting out to do. But the part I think I had a lot of problem with is understanding that the movement that I was in and dedicating myself to make it a stronger movement, there was a barrier. The hurtful feeling of knowing that that same movement is saying you're giving too much respect. The people that you represent really like you, to where somebody go into a back room and decided that if Andrea keep up that way, one day she'll be leading this organization, and we cannot have that. And so those are some of the things that I face, and wonder, why would I get up the next day and keep going? But that, remembering who I am and the path that I wanted, and making sure that I bring others with me, was really important to me, to take those bruises going on, and understanding that if I want to the world I want, and when I leave this world, what did I leave behind? What is the story that's told of me, and what could I have done differently that allow me to keep pressing on? So as a president, come to you as the president of Toronto and York Region Labour Council, and knowing that announcement that I'm the first woman of color to lead the Labour Council in 150 years. And knowing that that's so important, but I don't want to be the last. There is so many strong leaders out there that spend a lot of time talking about how to change this movement. How can we come together? But a lot of our truths are told in padded room, soundproof rooms, in a deep basement below another basement of our own vision and how to move, because we feel like there is barriers that's there. And for us to win, for us to expand ourselves, it takes all of us to, even if we're shaking in our boots, is to understand there is others like us, and once we are able to share those stories, we are able to bring others along and to get stronger and stronger, and not just to shout on our own, but others that whispering in our ears that they're with us, that's what we bring with us, you know. And so I love the that you're having this discussion this evening, because I know for myself as the president of the Labor Council, it's not easy. So, people celebrate me going there, and I love the fact that others kept calling and messaging and saying you need to step up to the plate. Why do you make excuse? Why do you think you're not good enough to be in that seat? And realize that there are others that benefit from me doing this work and felt that I have a way to go, and was able to hold out their hand to say, I'll guide you through that. And that's so important, because I didn't think that would happen. But I know as well that, once I got into the Labor Council seat, I've heard it where, one person came to me and said, now that you're here, them Black people is going to start showing up, and wonder, what does that mean? And the reality of the job that's unfinished for us. And sometimes as women, taking on these leadership role, and how do we do that, and making sure that the things that couldn't happen before to carry that torch, and so I don't want to take up too much of the time in it, so you could signal for me as well for that. But just so important that we don't give up on ourselves. It's so important, I felt that I was just taking on a fight because I have to, but there was no room in it for me. And so that's the candle that go out for us a lot of times when we start off excited inside of us, beaming inside of us to take on that work and feel that we are a soldier, and not necessarily our vision, our passion, and what we want to leave behind. We leave that behind and come up with many reasons why we take these fight on. And it shouldn't be. I think we need to feel excited about what we bring to the table, and able to look to others that's ready to lift us up into these movements. And I'd learned that a long time ago, that sometimes the very core of our movement, as the labor movement that organize us, can become our barrier as well. And part of that is we are the union, and we don't understand that it's our link. It's all those chains that pull us together. And we're not just followers. We do lead, and that's what makes us as one. And we should continue with that path, and we should continue to share our story. Share our story, and we'll find more people come along that's ready to walk with us, to take on the fight with us, because people are afraid of us than we think. And we shouldn't give up our own dream, because I remember myself just withering away. Like, I was happy to take on the fight, but I left myself out, and I saw I was losing myself. And waking up in the morning feeling like that light in that candle was going out, and realize that's not good enough for me. But thankful that there's others that mentor me and give me that strength every day to take on the fight as well. But I know, as a movement and as the union, no way that we should look the other way and say we're in a union and now they do their job. I think we need to be there to make sure that we get it done right. And we need to be there to make sure that we are not phased out as we take these fight on. And for others that continue to talk to others, because that do happen, to say, don't worry about Andrea. Andrea is going in a different direction where the wind don't blow. And so we find oftentimes where it's a job security issue. For others standing up for us, or people look like us standing up, somebody waved their job in front of them, that if you do speak up, then you have no job. So not all the silent doesn't mean that people are not on side. It just means that they're scared and not know how to do it, but that shouldn't hinder us from taking on the work. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting me. And and mine is just to give I would say, the encouragement that we got work to do, and no matter how
It's
we
true.
feel out of it, there's others that we can tap into to make sure that we continue taking on this work as well.
Thank you, Andrea. And I really appreciate, I know you were traveling and you're at the Coalition for Black Trade Unionists Conference, which is so important for all of us. And you always, exactly, you were a candle for me, and you always include us, a lot of us women and women of color, and you inspire us, and we support you, and you're always at all of our events. And thank you for making this time and starting off our event tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That was wonderful. And I always love hearing from Andrea, and we never get enough time to catch up. I'm going to have to call her after. So now I'll pass it on to Raul Burbano, who's just going to go over some housekeeping, community guidelines, and just what's going on tonight. And Raul Burbano is a Unifor organizer. He's working with us at the Canadian Freelance Union. So I'll give it to you, Raul, for a bit.
Sure. So I'll be very quick. My role in this is just to mention to folks that obviously we have via chat. We ask you just to be cognizant and not to spam the chat. In some of the cases, we have a bit of spamming. So please, everybody's doing a great job so far. If there is any spamming or any inappropriate discussion, personally, I'll message you. And then if it continues, I'll have to remove folks. But based on what I'm seeing, everybody's great. And we welcome everybody. And there's also going to be a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions you want to add, if you put your cursor to the bottom of your computer, you'll see, mute, stop, participants, all that kind of stuff, Q&A. You can put your question in the Q&A, and then we'll pick it up and add it to the Q&A period at the end. If you also put it in the chat, sometimes we'll grab that as well, and I'll be monitoring it on our Facebook. People were asking, so it's going to be, right now we're currently live streaming off the Canadian Freelance Union Facebook Live, so you can get it from there, and it'll be there, for forever. And then we're also gonna, once we're done, we're gonna have the recording on the YouTube channel, which I've also shared in the chat, all the contacts. So thank you very much and enjoy.
Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. And today we have a great discussion with two important speakers, scholars, activists. And first, I want to talk to you about the book that we got, which is called Organize, Fight, Win. I am still honestly moving through it because it's so clear, concise, I would say, and perfect for organizers and activists in the unions. And that's why we felt it was really important for us to read it collectively. And that's why we picked this book as something that we'd wanted to share with our membership and with union activists, but also we wanted to encourage reading collectively. We thank Verso for this copy. They gave us some copies for our office, and so we really appreciate it. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce both our speakers today. And Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly is an associate professor of African American Studies at the Wayne State University. She is the co-author with Gerard Horn of W.E. Du Bois, A Life in American History, the co-editor of Reproducing Domination on the Caribbean Post-Colonial State with Percy Hinson and Aaron Kamgisha, and a guest editor of Claudia Jones' Foremother of the World Revolution, a special issue of the Journal of Intersectionality, published in 2021. Her writings have appeared in a lot of places, but I'll share some of them. And in peer-reviewed journals, including Small Acts, Souls, Du Bois Review, Socialism and Democracy, International Journal of Africana Studies, and CLR James Journal. Her public scholarship can be found in Monthly Review, which I like to read myself, and her public scholarship can be found in Boston Review, Black Perspectives, and Black Agenda Report, which I know many of our audience also watches. Her commentary has been featured on NPR, Real News Network, popular podcasts such as Bad Faith, Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, The Dig, and Useful Idiots. Jodi Dean, Dr. Jodi Dean, teaches at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. Her books include The Communist Horizon, Crowds and Party, Comrade, which I just started reading rapidly before this session, which is very interesting and very good to read, published by Verso. She's a professor. I got to see her at U of T downtown a few years ago, and I hope both of them we get to see in Canada at some point again. And I welcome both of you. And Yes, we will begin our discussion. Thank you for joining us. Okay, and I apologize, I am looking at multiple screens, everybody, so Raul is helping me out a little tonight with everything. So I wanted to begin to both of you a little bit about, sorry, like why did you put this compilation of writings together? What was the motivation? Why do you feel it's so important? Yes, and I'll give it to both of you.
So I'm going to let Jodi like run point on this answer, but we like to just read the names of the women that we've compiled in this volume before we start our presentation. So we've got Ella Baker, Charlotta Bass, Dorothy Burnham, Liliana Burrows, Grace P. Campbell, Alice Childress, Marvell Cook, Esther Cooper Jackson, Thelma Dale Perkins, Tyra Edwards, Vicki Garvin, Yvonne Gregory, Lorraine Hansberry, Dorothy Hunton, Claudia Jones, Maud White Katz, Louise Thompson Patterson, and Eslanda Good Robeson.
Great. Thanks, Charisse. Yeah, I expect that some of y'all may have heard of some of the people that we've listed. But most of us, unless we're scholars of early and 20th century American history and labor history and Black history, we may not have heard of all of these people. And that's a shame because they were doing really crucial work. And one of our goals is uplifting these voices. So we came to this project because we had met at a conference, and then I was teaching a course in socialist feminism, and one of my students was looking for a text from Louise Thompson Patterson and couldn't find it anywhere. And I just figured, well, she must have been kind of lazy because she's very famous. How can you can't find this? And then I couldn't find it. And so then I asked Charisse, because Charisse knows all of these archives backwards and forwards, and she thought she had it. And then she didn't have it. And then she asked a couple of other people. And then we start to realize, okay, this should not be this hard. This writing needs to be available, and it needs to be accessible to organizers, to students, to researchers. And so we had the idea to put it together. And then COVID happened, and my daughter I had to come back home from college, and she's just sitting around, and I couldn't write because of like COVID brain and all of this. I'm like, okay, well, this is a good time to put this work together, right? This will be that project. And also Sadie, my daughter, who did a lot of the typing work, we did pay her, so she wasn't just a totally exploited laborer. So we hope that that folks will use the book really as organizers and in reading groups, because it still speaks to our present. It was really gratifying that you were finding that it does, Amina.
That's basically, I don't have anything to add. Yes, that's why we wrote the book.
Thank you. Okay, well, I wanted to take a question from one of our members in the audience. Well, one of our activist community members, Sarah, is on the call, and she was going to ask a question.
Absolutely. I just want to start by saying that it is such an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you for the depth and the clarity that you bring to our movements and to our thinking as well. In Organize, Fight, and Win, the women that you write about reveal how imperialism isn't just something that happens abroad, how it's deeply connected to the struggles on this stolen land. And of course, Black radical praxis has always exposed the deep links between domestic oppression and, of course, global empire. And so, in light of the genocide in Gaza today as a microcosm of that violence, how does the political praxis of the women in this book help us better understand imperialism as both global and domestic? And how might their commitment to international solidarity push scholars and union organizers to maybe rethink the boundaries of transnational studies and, of course, of labor theory as well?
That's a really great question. And I think just, the very basic answer is that imperialism is the centrifugal force of their activism and organizing. And one of the ways that this manifests is through the Black Belt thesis or the Black Belt Nation thesis, for example, most of the women, even through the period of so-called browderism, I'm not going to go through the history of the Communist Party, but like most of these women understand themselves as denizens of a domestic colony, right? As nationally oppressed, which means that their experience is not merely discrimination or exclusion or reducible to like the hearts and minds of Southerners, but rather it is a structural reality that mimics the colonial relationships abroad. The difference being that the colony is within the belly of the beast, so to speak, right? Now, one of the fallacies or one of the shortcomings of the analysis of the Communist Party writ large is like a failure to engage with settler colonialism, but how they interrogate imperialism is by thinking about the so-called Negro question and the ways that Black people, especially their situation in the South, the semi-feudal character of the South, et cetera. Now, you have to understand the relationship of Black people to the capitalist mode of production, to capitalist social relations, to really have a robust, any type of sort of robust organizing movement. Any real proletarian revolution has to take seriously Black liberation, and not just Black liberation in some bourgeois nationalist sense, but rather because the realities of Black people in the United States are intimately linked to people in the Caribbean and Africa and parts of Eastern Europe, that these forms of economic exploitation and domination are all linked. That is to say that, you know, capitalism is an international system, imperialism is an international system, and the capitalists, the ruling class, they're internationalists. And so workers have to be internationalists. Ordinary people have to be international in our understanding of what's happening and make connections, for example. So to bring it up contemporarily, we will make connections, for example, between the 1033 program here in the United States and the forms of policing in Gaza and in Palestine, and the deadly exchange program, where there's a sort of feedback loop between training these techniques of violence and repression between US police forces and the IDF. So these things are intimately linked, and that as militarization becomes the means of international relations, those things were down back to the United States. And so militarism in the form of policing and police occupation of racialized communities, of poor communities, becomes the other side to that. And that the US imperialism started at home. This is not because of settler colonialism, because of genocide against indigenous folks. And so I think that these women understood the international situation, and we also have to understand the international situation, and not just in a sort of intellectual sense, but that in a very real material sense, in a very real, ethical and moral sense. We are bound up. What happens in Gaza is a dress rehearsal for what can happen to the rest of us, and that we can't, in our current moment with, impending marching, proto-fascism, whatever we want to call it, we don't have the luxury of not caring about an oppressed group, about a colonized group, because these conditions are being generalized to everybody. And so even if you're just acting out of self-interest, you have skin in the game, right? And as I'm African-American, there's been all of these discussions within the Black community, for example, about all sorts of shit, like the election and blah, blah, blah. And, what does that matter to us? But, and part of being a Pan-Africanist, as well as a communist, a Marxist, is emphasizing all of this is linked, right? All of us are negotiating the terms of our immiseration currently. And the more that we do so, the more that we don't link up these struggles, we do so like to our own detriment. So that's a very long and rambling answer. Jodi would love to hear your perspective.
I thought that was a great answer. I'll just give something really small on it. I think in some ways they had an advantage that we don't have. As Charisse said, they begin as internationalists, right? We've got some great writings in the book from Williana Burroughs, and she's writing reports that are going to be delivered at a meeting of the Comintern, of the Communist International in the 1930s. And so her reports are about the conditions facing people all over the world, right? She doesn't just talk as if the only struggle is in the United States or North America. She begins as an internationalist. And so she's looking at, women in the colonies and women in the fields and, and women in factories. She's looking at conditions of families. And so this beginning from the position of internationalism, right? And internationalism as anti-imperialism and as global struggle, I think is something that the Palestine movement has been letting us redevelop in places like the United States and other parts of the global North. But we're not even back yet to where they were in the 70s or 80s in their internationalism. So we're getting there. But I think that when we are part of these struggles, we rebuild the internationalism that our movements should have always had and did have at one time.
That was such a brilliant response. You both have deeply inspired my academic work. And so thank you for sharing your knowledge, and thank you to the event organizers, Amina, Ro, you folks as well.
No problem. And I think the next question kind of is, you brought up Williana Burroughs, whose report I was like going over a few times, and I had put quote, and I was talking to Raul about it. And I think why this book is so important is because it kind of like transcends time, because a lot of us organizers are dealing with these exact same issues. So I just wanted to read page 60, which kind of stood out to me. And Williana Burroughs wrote this in it's in here, and it's yes, and she writes like a paragraph: clean food. A correspondent writes us, while waiting for a friend to buy some food at a vegetable stand, I noticed some corn offered for sale, too old and worm-eaten to be thrown to the pigs or the chickens. It was priced at 3 ears for 10 cents. When I told the owner he should be reported for daring to sell such stuff, he turned the price tag down. Every woman knows how important good, wholesome food is for the safety of her family, and especially for that of the children. The doctor has often warned her on this manner. She spends much time getting the best food values possible for her few pennies. And I know that like this is just one of her pieces, and I read another at the beginning as well, just kind of her reflection on the failure of unions and the failure of the left to help Black workers get jobs, and then the failure of the union. It's like multi-layered, and sort of her critique. And I think when I was reading through a lot of this, I was looking at like women, and this is part of a question that I wanted to ask you. I'm looking at women that were critical of the organizations, but saw it as important to be part of an organization, to be part of a union, and so, or to be part of the Communist Party, and they saw this as the vehicle, and to also intervene in the labor movement, or to, you mentioned the common turn, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, like where Williana Burroughs also intervened, and spoke on the failure of the Communist Party in Europe and so forth. So as members of unions and organizations, many of us are very critical, but we also see it as important to stay members and to growth. And a lot of the book talks about some of the women who are focused on growth and bringing more members to the party and to the left. So I was going to ask both of you, like both of your work sort of talks about the importance of organizations, a communist party. Do you still see the parties as relevant? And why do you still see unions and organizations as central to collective emancipation, liberation, and struggle?
I'll start us out. I really appreciate, Amina, how you brought out the way that Williana Burroughs' criticisms are criticisms from within. They're criticisms not just to trash an organization and to bring it down and to say it's no good and just to kind of complain and whine. No, she's doing it from within to build it, to push it to do more, to push it to be better. And that to me is the right attitude toward our organizations, right? If anyone can sit around and complain, but doing this work is hard. And that's the other thing. One of the things that I really was hoping for in the pieces that we were compiling was text that would speak to organizers, because what's so wild is how their problems are still our problems. Like, not enough money, we need more leaders. Exactly how do we distribute the work? There's a lot of work to be done, but it's hard to figure out how to distribute it well to get to develop the leaders. And so it's not the case that, right, like in the 20s and 30s, that everything was solved and that all of the unions and the parties were like super powerful and now we're addressing brand new things. No, when they were building, they were always struggling and having to learn and having to improve, and it was never enough. But that sense of never enough is coming from within and being driven by the struggle and the urgency, not from without and saying a party and a union are hopeless because the work is too hard and the people aren't what we want. So I'm a communist and a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I think that being a member of any kind of militant organization that is doing that kind of work is really important. And that, in fact, one of the things that's driven me crazy in my, over the last 20 or 30 years is this tendency on parts of the left to say we don't need these organizations, we can just kind of, DIY, horizontal or whatever. And what have we seen in the global north? We've seen the rise of an authoritarian right. How have they done it? By taking over the state. And so if we give up on this, we lose the institutions that we need to fight our struggles, right? We lose the ability to defend ourselves. So I think it's been a huge mistake to not try to change the institutions and just to give up on them.
Some Andrea Griffith asked in the chat, everything we're referencing is in the book Organize, Fight, Win. Yeah, everything's in the book. I'll just add to what Jodi said. I think, you have to have some sort of container for struggle. Like, I'm just not one of these spontaneous horizontalists. Like, you have to have a container for struggle. And I think that discipline is really important, and movement organizations, parties, and the like can cultivate discipline. And I think that the other thing I wanted to mention about Liliana Burrows is that she always has solutions. And so in her work, her piece, Negro Work, has not been entirely successful when she's criticizing the lack of Black people recruited to the party. She's like, here's what we need to do. Party political campaign, classes and forums, all the campaigns I mentioned above, hold comrades accountable for tasks, a united front for newcomers. Like, it's very practical. And so it's not just, whereas, nowadays we take it, create our infographic on Canvas to shit on whoever you don't like in the organization. They're actually trying to work it out within the, to wage principle struggle, because it's important. And because it's no panacea, as Jodi said, but it's better than not being in an organization. It's better than not being part of an international network and cohort of people struggling against imperialism. And so I think that we just have to be a little bit more disciplined and sober when we're thinking about like what it means to be in an organization. Any organization that doesn't have contradictions, I always say this, if it doesn't have contradictions, it's probably a CIA front, because we are in a capitalist system, we're in a imperialist system, we're in a patriarchal system, etc. So those contradictions are going to show up, and part of the work is to work through them and work through our own internal contradictions as well as like the external.
Thank you. That was really what I was thinking while reading it, and while reading a lot of both of your work. And that's why again, we felt it was really important to have both of you. And now I wanted to introduce Nigel Barif, who is a teacher, and he's also a vice president. Nigel is the anti-racist lead and liaison to the anti-racism committee. He is always around in our city as well. And I wanted to bring him on to ask a question.
Thank you very much. And hi, Dr. Dean and Dr. Burden-Stelly. I thank you both for your revolutionary work and holding space for this dialogue. As Amina said, my name is Nigel Barif, and obviously I'm a Black educator and a trade unionist based here in Toronto, where I do serve as the Vice President of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, representing almost 10,000, almost 11,000 members. Over the past year, I've experienced firsthand what it means to be silenced and targeted for standing in solidarity with Palestine. I've faced a coordinated attack by groups like B'nai B'rith, including legal threats and complaints aimed at stripping my teaching license. Many of our members, particularly Black, Indigenous, and racialized educators, have been hauled into meetings simply for acknowledging Palestinian humanity. As we push back against these systems that criminalize truth-telling and anti-colonial solidarity, how can we as rank and file union members and educators navigate this moment with courage and clarity? What strategies do you see for building collective resistance and refusing to cede moral ground on Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, Jodi can obviously speak to her own experience of repression. I think people have to show up. Like, you have to show up, even if you think that it doesn't immediately impact you, even if you think, you study, I don't know, clay pots from the fucking 11th century. They're going to come for, like, the humanities was already under duress. Like, so I'm speaking in the context of the university, but in a general sense, I think that people just like have to show up and realize this is an anti-intellectual attack. It's a anti-history attack. Like, it's an attack on knowing where we have been so that we might chart a better path forward. I think that it is attack on any semblance of progressivism. And again, I speak from the context of the United States, where, like, we know that DEI is like woefully inadequate, right? It's a mollification technique, and yet even that is too much for this right-wing incursion. And so I do think that part of how we show up courageously is, like, courage is a muscle. You actually do have to practice it. This is why, again, in the higher education context, when people are like, "I'll wait till I get tenure to speak up," it's like, no, because by then you'll be socialized into being a coward, right? Into having a particular fealty to the institution. And so in my perspective, it's like, they can't fire everybody. One. Two is that the people who have more relative access to power, resources, etc., have to realize that they too have skin in the game. I think that there just needs to be organizing. Like, the left, especially in the conscious US, is extraordinarily reactive. Like, we're very rarely proactive. And so we're always responding to the right, which means that we're effectively letting the right set our agenda. And so at a certain point, like, we just have to struggle for the things that we are committed to. We can't keep trying to, like, at least we get this. No, we need to push for the big thing, because now is the time. Because what happens is that the easy thing, the accessible thing, right, is wholly reversible. Look at DEI again. And so to me, I just think, to make a short story long, I think that everybody in all strata need to show up. I think that we need to be organized. I think that we have to practice being courageous every single day. That doesn't, and to me, that also means being strategic. Like, you don't going on X and like dumping your purse out and saying the most, inflammatory thing. Like, you have to understand the historical moment, because then that takes revolutionary energy to organize against the attack against you. So it means being strategic. It means being disciplined. It means being organized. It means really being committed to, it means being as committed to every sphere of struggle as the right wing is, because everything is a terrain of struggle for the right wing. And I think that we also need to have that clarity.
What I'll add is I have a sense of what you're talking about, Nigel, because I've gone through the same thing. I got suspended from teaching last year, and subject to a ridiculous investigation that lasted several months. It was publicly condemned in like a really public way. Like, the president of the colleges where I teach sent an announcement to like 5,000 people about my being dismissed. It was ridiculous. But it's still hard, right? It's a fight. And it's interesting how hard it is for people to not come out, even when it's in their interest, say, to protect free speech, to protect due process, to much less stand up for people who are victims of a genocide and victims of oppression. I think that Charisse really gives us crucial guidance there in saying, like, we have to fight the right on every single front, right? Because they're going to go after us on every single front. And if they win on one place, then they're going to keep trying to win in other ones. And I think that that's really something that we can use in our organizing. I honestly think that most people really don't think it's okay for all of these children to be killed. I really don't think that most people think that this unbelievably indiscriminate, campaign of bombing and setting the tents on fire and destroying the hospitals and killing so many people is a legitimate response. And it's gone on for so long. I mean, people might not be, full-fledged, wanting to go really, really far, but very few people, I think, are in favor of what's going on at this point. And that's a way to build large coalitions and also to let people realize the stronger that we are on anything, the stronger we're going to be on everything, right? That's the way we keep building our forces and building our fronts. So, but again, as no one thinks this is easy. But I think that the combination of a basic humanity and a little self-interest is actually going to work in our favor on this.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and we will take a question now from Liz, who is in the audience as well, who is a fellow organizer rep that we know. And I just opened you up, Liz. Sorry, I think I'm click heavy there. You might want to unmute yourself, Liz.
Oh, I didn't even see where that mute button was.
There you go. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Perfect.
oh, shoot. Okay. I'm really excited to be here, and just listening to how you all are speaking about what's been on my mind for some time is really, I'm really grateful for. I think for me, I find myself in a moment of being a bit lost right now as somebody who's an organizer or claims to be one. And I just feel I'm in a space right now where I can't locate where we are in history. And usually I've been able to say, oh, yes, this is what happened in 1972. And so we could probably respond like this. And I think I'm looking to you to kind of help me with this. When I think about over the last decade, I've seen some movements here in Canada, from Idle No More to Black Lives Matters to what we're seeing now with Palestine, and even some more women's organizing movements we've seen. And we've seen these waves go very big and gain momentum, and then it's sort of co-opted and enter a capitalist space, and out pops one person who represents this, and the movement's actually not it kind of I won't say fizzles, but just in a way it's co-opted, like we've seen when it goes into a capitalist space. So, and now I'm seeing this happen right now, especially as it's over the last 2 years has been really brutal. And I'm trying to locate, like, I don't know what this, what's happening, what's going on, how do we locate where we are right now in history, based on the research that you've done, and what keeps us kind of moving forward with all that's happening right now with the repression of rights, people being jailed. Like you said, when we talk about an internationalist worker and all this stuff happening, where are we now? What do we do? That's such a broad question.
That's okay. Thanks, Liz.
Well, I mean, I think that we sort of need to think about like where we are, number one, where we are in the dialectic, and two, like what is the correlation of forces. So, but in terms of historical periods, there's like we can say like an 1878 to 1890 moment that might be useful, like end of Reconstruction. There's like the 1919 to 1920 moment, which is the confluence of like the first Red Scare and then the race riots, right? The 1919 race riots and the sort of the way that post-war demobilization informed that. So that's a moment. Then there's like the mid 1920s with the consolidation of monopoly here and the ways that the business class here was very supportive and very excited about Mussolini trying to organize. This is where you also see the rise of like business unionism, open shops. So like this true American moment. Of course, the periods that I study is like, you know, the immediate World War II moment, the Cold War. So early Cold War, 47 to like, we could say 47 to 54-ish. And then there's like the mid 1960s to early 1970s moment with like the rise of COINTELPRO. So all of these are just ways to look at this sort of relationship between upheaval on the one hand and then like right-wing revanchism or a particular type of state imposition, and that in relationship to like downturns in the political economy domestically and globally. So anyway, all of this methodologically, what you want to look at is like triangulate like war, economic downturn, a sort of revanchism of like repressive, like right-wing forces, but then also a sort in response to like some sort of radical upsurge. So the 1919 moment, for example, you saw like the Negro movement, you saw workers' militancy, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that if you look at different moments in history, and of course, I'm still using the US as a reference point. This is not global history, obviously. But I think that looking at those correlations, and those are just some moments I pulled out, you can kind of see what is at play. And that can give some information about sort of how to locate or think about this moment from different perspectives, but also like think about what is to be done. Yeah, and so I think that is kind of like where we are historically. But it's also, I think, important to think about like what's unique about this moment. Because there's that correlation of forces question. There, you can feel however you feel about the Soviet Union, but here's what we do know. They provided an economic and ideological counterweight for a very long time that made that, and there were particular possibilities that came out of that. There is not the same, so there's BRICS, there's China, but there's not the same ideological global counterweight that there was in those earlier moments that I named, especially from 1919 onward. And so that matters, right? And so we have to think about how does, supporting Palestinian liberation, for example, how might that stand in for at least a developing global counterweight? So these are all the things that we need to consider. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but those moments and thinking about those particular correlations or those conjunctures can help us think about like where we are. And also just like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, as they say. So there's nothing like brand new, but there are unique features to this moment.
A few things. If we think about the kind of movement feeling right now, things, we're in a kind of ebb period, right? Things feel differently from the way they did during the, sort of student campus uprising last year. And so, things feel differently from from the way they felt during the George Floyd protest in the summer of 2020. That's always going to be the case with movements, right? Sometimes there's a lot of energy and sometimes there's not. And what really matters is doing the work when we're in an ebb, and building the organizations and training the cadre and doing the education work, even when it's like, the general atmosphere seems kind of hopeless and depressing. So that's the first thing I want to emphasize. The second thing I want to emphasize is, I fully agree with Charisse that things, that the collapse of this or defeat of the Soviet Union was a major force, right? And I've thought for a long time that the defeat of socialism would lead to the defeat of a particular kind of Western bourgeois democracy. And that's also because of that absence of a counterweight. And that's what we're in right now. We should also, I think, keep in mind that we're in a period of desperate and declining U.S. hegemony, economically and politically. And what happens when you've got a declining hegemon? There's going to act out and be violent and be unpredictable. And so that's also part of our present. But that's good. Right, declining U.S. hegemony is an advance, right? The defeat of neoliberalism, which I think can, easily be dated or not, maybe arguably be dated to 2008, is a victory. The capitalist class doesn't know what it's doing. They're trying to put all this energy into AI, but that's essentially, in my view, a boondoggle, and going to be terrible for the working classes in general. But we're in this interregnum period, and it's a period of a lot of possibility. But all of that, will depend on can the left actually take advantage of the interregnum and make some advances? Can we build the organizations and the coalitions that we need in this period when things are so open? I mean, that's to me what the ball game is right now.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing. So I think that there's a defeat of neoliberalism probably in the core, but what we are seeing is a resurgence or a durability in like the semi-periphery, right? I think that that's something to be taken into account, and part of what some of the disjuncture or the conflict within BRICS is, right? So anyway, I think there are multiple things happening at once. I do agree with interregnum analysis. I think that there's different, if we to think about neo-feudalism, for example, there's just different, just as, slave capitalism existed alongside free capitalism. I think that there are still ways that neoliberalism is developing in other parts of the world and being sort of propped up by the World Bank. I think that it's decaying rapidly in the core. But I think that, the global South is the decisive factor, like what's going to happen there. And so I've been, we look to like the AES, for example. What is going to happen with Cuba, right? What is going to happen with Venezuela? Are we able to lift the blockade? With the lifting of the blockade, what are the possibilities? And so I think that holding all those realities together is really important. There's more and more like fragmentation, right? Or unevenness happening as shit is as we're interregnuming.
Thank you. No, and a lot of us also in the audience too. Liz, did you have something to say? Feel free.
No, I was just saying thank you. Yeah, I am looking forward to this kind of destruction that we're seeing right now happen in the US, unfortunately, but also fortunately. So thank you.
I think a lot of us too, as unionists and activists, and like the book has made those connections with the trade unionists and the CPUSA, the women who definitely looked at internationalism, and we're looking at these questions of what's happening in Cuba and what's happening in other parts of the world, with China, with the ongoing conflict in Europe, and how that impacts us. And we are trying to make those connections and have more solidarity with workers around the world. So I wanted to ask you a question, then I'm going to take questions from the audience, because we are trying to end at 7:30 for everybody's health and well-being. We know our speakers have been with us for a little bit. So many people in the audience are organizers. I am myself, and that's why this book, again, was really resonated with me, because they talk a lot about growth and bringing Black workers in, and bringing members into the party, and growing the labor movement, and seeing why Black workers weren't rising to higher positions within their unions. And all these questions is something that we're all grappling with till this day. And reading some of Jodi's work, and then looking at this work that both of you did together, how service work or domestic work and social reproduction historically has been done by women of color and Black women, and how, different waves in history where white women were, trying to get out into the workforce, Black women were already working and doing all that work, right? And didn't have the ability to have a family in many cases, or Indigenous women, with the genocide, ongoing genocide on Indigenous people. So what I was going to ask you was, the question I was going to ask you is, I read a piece that Jodi talks about how the service sector can be the labor vanguard, and why we need universal basic services. And why I'm connecting all of this together, sort of, is because our members, a lot of them do this type of entertainment service sector. And we know with the tariffs and the attempt by the empire to kind of revive manufacturing, but we know millions and millions of workers are in service sector. So I wanted to ask both of you, like, what we are interested in growth. A lot of us, we are interested in, like these women, bringing and retaining and growing membership. What advice can you give us from your research, from your history of work that you've done? How do we follow in these footsteps? How do we make the gains that we saw in the past, and move from the rise of the fascism, international fascism? How do we grow our own left organizations?
I'm going to answer the question a little bit on this adjacently, and because I expect that as organizers, y'all have a lot more practical knowledge about reaching people, but what I want to talk a little bit about is this universal basic services in the service sector. So in my new book, Capital's Grave, Neo-Feudalism and the New Class Struggle, I emphasize that the majority of workers on the planet are in services. This is not just in the so-called developed, or but more accurately, the imperial core, right? It's everywhere. Even in like the only part of the world where services are not in the majority is in the Mideast Arab region where it's still there's a majority in industry still. But every place else, you've got huge, large sectors of services. So this is typically associated with, for good economic reasons, with the secular stagnation that is facing the kind of global capitalist economy, right? The declining growth rates. It makes sense. Like, most of service work is not kind of so-called productive labor, although some of it is. I think we need to hold on to this idea that majority of workers are in services and recognize two things. Thing one, because of climate change, we cannot have a project in the global north, right? In the imperial core, that's about reindustrializing. There are going to be parts of the South that will want and need the development of industry. But in a lot of the imperial core, no, that's not what we need at all. So that's thing one. Second thing is to think about, why is it so hard for so many people in our everyday lives to recognize themselves as workers? Like, people don't, they might say, oh, like, I'm a cultural worker, or I'm a knowledge worker, or whatever, but people don't, they really have a hard time thinking of themselves as a member of the working class. My hypothesis is that's because people don't see their labor as producing a future. Right? Instead, we're like taking care of the consumption needs of people with more money than us, right? All the way down the road. Like, we're serving some kind of elite. Now, but what if we recognize that no, services are actually what we're going to need on a warming planet? More education, more health, more restoration, more wetlands regeneration, right? More building and nurturing of communities, more, taking care of one another, right? What if we recognize that services are, like, even if they're not the kind of social production that we're used to thinking about with respect to industry, they still are forms of social reproduction and the forms of production and reproduction that we need on a warming planet. So the first thing is that we can recognize service workers as a vanguard. And I think that that can actually give us a strength in our organizing and our understanding as workers, because it's like, yes, we are building the future. We are a wave of the future. And of course, we need to be able to live lives that are themselves flourishing, that aren't taken for granted, that aren't disrespected, that aren't underwaged, that aren't completely precarious. So that, to me, is the first part. And then the one of the things that I think could be a key kind of campaign or demand or semi-horizon is universal basic services, right? That's actually going to have to be a central aspect of whatever economies we have on a warming planet, right? Like taking care of housing, transportation, health, and education. These are all services that are necessary for everyone to flourish. So I think the service sector as the vanguard of the struggle for an economy that works for everyone, because it's about services on a warming planet.
I just want to, I mean, I think that the organizing that Black women were doing around domestic work is pretty informative for contingent and precarious labor organizing now. And I don't know that necessarily Black women domestics presented themselves as the vanguard, well, as the vanguard per se, but rather that if we want to get a true sort of understanding of like what labor looks like, we have to take into account these workers who are thought to be like unorganizable. I mean, I think this is also the logic behind like organizing sharecroppers. I think that all of this stuff is important because these are people who are working outside of the traditional industrial sector. And then part of the understanding that those forms of like agrarian or reproductive labor actually set the price for industrial labor. That, and sort of, we have to consider the working conditions, working protections, all those types of things for people who are working in areas that are not factories, if we are going to have an understanding of like or any understanding of like human flourishing, any basic, any real whatever from each, according to their ability to each according to their need. And so I do think that studying these writings of what the types of questions that these women were asking, what were their concerns, who are they accountable to, can be helpful for thinking about the different types of the different sort of types of organizing we need to implement in all of these different areas of work in both the listed and illicit economy, to be honest.
I want to add one thing on this, the organizing question. In one of the chapters in here from Esther Cooper Jackson, it's based on her master's thesis about doing research on domestic workers in the United States. And she talks about, first of all, the challenge of organizing the unorganized, particularly people who are separated out in households, and how challenging that is. But she's also like, it's challenging, but it's not impossible. Here's a bunch of examples where people have done it. Now, they've all come up against barriers, but we can identify the barriers and use that knowledge to try to go further. So it's not a kind of bright-eyed, oh, everything is dandy, but it's like, it is not impossible. And here are some strategies that can be, it's just like like Charisse is mentioning with Willie Anna Burroughs, right? There's always something else to try. There's suggestions to make to go further. I mean, because you can't just give up, right? If you give up, then, you know, they just kill us all. So.
Well, thank you. Yes. And with that, we will take Raul's question, and then we will, because we are reaching 7:30.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Okay, great. Everybody can hear me okay? Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the spirited discussion. It was really informative, interesting, and I really appreciate your time. And thank you, Amina, for coordinating this work. I know it's not easy. You're trying to ask a lot of questions and get a lot of people involved. So thank you. My question is around more praxis, because as an organizer now in North America, it's a lot like kind of Charisse said. I'm on Canva trying to build nice images, you know, do webinars, which is very different from other places. I've done a lot of work in Latin America where it's action, where it's, you know, theory is less, not that it's not important, but it's not the be all of it. And people are out on the street and people are actually doing, and they're, you know, you build solidarity by being with the communities that are in struggle, not by theorizing about it, you know, in many cases. So I guess my question is, in the North American context, how do we balance that, or what suggestions do you have for organizers, academics, whomever it may be, you know, balancing the theory and action so that we become less keyboard warriors, hopefully, and everybody shares in a bit of the pain, not just a few hardcore activists who are being criminalized. Not that we want to share in pain, but.
I mean, I think we have to have political education. Like, I just can't bifurcate it in that way, because especially in the US context, the United States is the most highly propagandized nation in the world. And it's not actually close. So people like North Korea, it is the United States, period. And we're in a profound battle of ideas. And so we have to have, because to me, it's understanding the what, right? Having a framework for understanding the what is going to shape the so what. And so I do think that we need action. I do think that we need to be engaging in campaigns, engaging in practical action, talking to regular people. But I do think that because we don't have a robust anti-imperialist analysis, it's not that prevalent in the context of the United States. I think that that's why we get stuck in the quagmire of mobilization that doesn't transform into organizing. This is why we have 5,000 5-people organizations and very few mass organizations. To me, the ideological question, the political economy question is really, or excuse me, the political education question is really important. At the same time that, to me, so there's a difference between political education and like reading groups or study groups, right? The political education is for practical action. And so I think that part of what needs to be figured out is, in whatever organization, it's like, what is the local praxis that can come out of that study? What is the national, what is the international? And figuring out sort of what is the day-to-day practical work that needs to happen, like, locally. I think I really feel like we're very much entrapped in celebrity culture and influencer culture. And that, I say that because then this is how we know very prominent names of people who organize unions, and then they're at the Grammys and the Oscars, and no real organizing is happening. And we can reproduce those logics or those dynamics within our organizations, whereby it becomes rewarding to just to speak, to know things, right? To just have to demonstrate mastery and to be asked to go on these podcasts or whatever, as opposed to actually applying that political education. And so to me, I think it's finding the correct balance, because we are up against, again, sorry, my reference point is the US, but it's like 60 to 70% functional illiteracy. So like that is what we're up against. And this is what makes people susceptible to like the manosphere and the flat earth, whatever the fuck people believe. I don't know. Africans are indigenous to the US and we're Moors and shit. Like there's all of this misinformation and disinformation. We have to combat that. And I think that, so I think we need both. And maybe it's my academic bias, but I really think that the battle of ideas is crucial right now. And it is through social media and through the Hollywood industrial complex. And, the fact that 3 corporations own most of the media in North America, I think that those are things that need to be combated. So.
Thank you.
I don't know if we have time for me to.
We will, of
respond
course,
to
of course.
I think the question is so crucial, and I find myself just completely torn all the time about it. Right when, let's say, I meet young people who talk about socialism, and they got radicalized by some kind of, what is it, a streamer on Twitch. That's like stuff I don't even know, right? Like the technology stuff, or people who's, they want to be involved, but their degree of involvement means I'm going to post things on Reddit. And I understand that that is a source of community for a lot of people who are lonely, who are particularly young people, particularly young guys, and they don't have a sense of community and they don't know things and so part of me is like, is that then a spot to, to try to hope that there's, better outreach, organizing, political education, like Charisse was saying. So I think that sometimes, but then other times I'm like, all of the twitching in the world doesn't get us enough people out protesting at the farm that was like 3 hours from me, where the people who were arrested by ICE were the folks who were organizing the union, right? The farm workers union. And it's like, oh, the farmers said they didn't turn them in. Yeah, right. And so we've been having demonstrations there, and all the twitching in the world doesn't get enough people there. And so I do feel this strong thing of like, how do you get folks to move from I want to talk and express my opinion to I am willing to go to the meeting, set up the chairs, go to the demonstration, make the placards, make the banners, overcome my social anxiety, get on the megaphone. I mean, it's a challenge. And I think it's, I was privileged enough to get to talk to Alvaro Garcia Linera about this. And I was like complaining about social media. And he's like, yeah, other people complained about television. It's not new. Even like talking about having a big picture. And I really appreciated that, which is like every struggle is going to have its challenges. And that may be one of ours. So, but I'm just like, I feel that question like you asked so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that last question was so good, Rahul. I don't even know if it was on our list, but it really wrapped everything up. And I think a lot of us are grappling with the challenge of social media. And I think both of you, why we invited you is we do see the importance of political education. And we saw it in the pandemic in Canada with the rise of like right-wing online streamers, all this voices, right? And some of them platforming themselves, making connections that they're for Palestine or they're for workers. And, it really, and just listening to a lot of Charisse and Jodi's work, you both emphasize like why we need clear, concrete, concise, like education, and we need to clear the way and be clear. Even the conceptualization of comrade, I really resonated with me, and I'm like, oh, I have to start calling people comrade again. And so I really thank both of you for making time for our beautiful little local. We hope that we can share this with our members and encourage our members to read during this time and learn and grow and bring that theory into praxis, like these women built that theory, and built these ideas through their own practice and through their own victories. And we thank both of you for making time. I know, Charisse, you're a new mom, so we do appreciate it. Raul, do you have any last words before we close?
Nope. Thank you very much for organizing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
everyone.
having us.
Have a good evening and buy the book.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you, Jodi. Thank you, Charisse. Thanks, Amina.
How do I get out?